Hi guys, it's Laura. Thanks for watching and welcome back to my channel. Christmas is coming, and even though my entire channel is basically one big collection of gift ideas, I always like adding a few more things right before Christmas. Today we're gonna be making easy leg warmers. I started knitting this year again, so I thought why not add a few knitting tutorials also to my channel for those of you who want to try something new. And don't worry if you have never tried knitting, this is going to be a very beginner-friendly tutorial. I'm going to explain how to cast on, how to do the knit stitch, the purl stitch, how to cast off. I will tell you how many stitches I have used for my size, and I will also add a few options for more sizes down below in the description box. I am knitting Continental style, and we are going to use the magic loop method, which means we are going to knit in a circle. So if you want to know how to make easy leg warmers, then please keep watching. So I already went on and finished the first leg warmer because I don't know about you, but I personally find it way easier to follow tutorials, especially knitting tutorials, when I have already seen what the finished product is supposed to look like. And I also find it's really nice to be able to compare your progress with the finished piece so that you can see where you are. So the leg warmer is a very simple design. It's super easy, super beginner friendly. So we have on both ends this knit to purl to rib, and then it's simply knit. So we have here 30 rows of the rib on each side, and I made my 100 rows long, which is my personal favorite length of leg warmers, unless I want to have over knee leg warmers. And that is of course up to you. You can always make the leg warmer shorter or longer. However, if you plan on making the leg warmer so long that it would go over your knees, you would have to increase on the top, because otherwise the leg warmer would end up being a little bit too tight over your thighs. So we're gonna stick to this. The yarn that I'm using is a simple cotton yarn. It's actually quite thin, but that's what I wanted. I wanted to have also a little bit thinner leg warmers that are also great for spring and summer. It's a yarn that would also work very well for crochet. So anyway, the needles that I'm supposed to use are 2.5 to 3.5 millimeters, which is the European size, and that equals 2 to 4 the US size. The size of this yarn ball is 50 gram, that's 125 meters, and the US size is 1.75 ounces, and that's 137 yards. And I will need 2 of these in rose gold and 1 in mauve. So that's what was left from the first ball once I was finished with this leg warmer, and that's what was left from the mauve shade when I was finished with the cuffs. I'm using the magic loop needles. Admittedly, these are just a little bit bigger. These are size 4 millimeters, and I should use 3.5 maximum, but that worked well because I don't want my leg warmer to be too tight. Here I have the written pattern, so if you already know how to knit, you don't have to bother to watch the entire video. I'm just gonna tell you right away that I cast on 52 stitches. Then I made the first rib, which was knit to purl to for 30 rows. Then I started with the knit pattern for 100 rows, and then I made a second rib, which was again 30 rows, and then I cast it off, and that was it. So if that's all you needed to know, here you go. Thanks for watching, and you can also look down below in the description box if you want to have more options for different sizes. And now for those of you who are new to knitting, so I'm knitting Continental style because that's what I learned from my grandma and from my mother, and we are using the magic loop method, which means we are going to knit in a round. Before we start, you will also need a marker. I personally like using just some leftover yarn. I make a knot here in the middle, and that's something you will pull on your needles, and that's going to mark the beginning and the end of each row. Ideally, you would use some completely different colors so that it easily stands out. So I picked this gray yarn. I always keep a couple of markers in my box where I also keep my needles for my knitting projects. So that's the needle that I use in order to sew together knitted pieces. Yeah, and I thought this is also a great way how to store a few markers for future projects. So the first thing we have to do is to cast on the stitches, so we will need 52 stitches. So I have written it down here on the piece of paper, and I already prepared a little note K2 P2, which means knit 2 purl 2, and here I'm gonna make my lines then for the rows. So let's start with casting on. So I have here this long piece of yarn with which I'm gonna start, and again I'm knitting the Continental method. So what I do is I grab the yarn and then I pull it over my thumb, and then I pull it beneath my thumb and then over the index finger and then back. So I have here this loop. Let me show you again. So I grab the yarn, I pull it over my thumb, then I go behind my thumb, I pull the yarn over my index finger, and then I go back, and then I grab it. I have this kind of loop here, and now I grab my knitting needles and I go from behind, beneath this section of the yarn, and then I'm going behind this section of the yarn and I'm going to pull it through here, and then I have the first stitch. And now I'm gonna move a little bit differently. So I'm gonna go here from beneath, and then I grab this section of yarn, pull it through, release from my thumb, and pull it on my needle. And then I grab beneath this again with my thumb, go through from below, grab this piece of yarn, pull it through, and secure it on my needle with just pulling on it a little bit. So we have now 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So again, this is how I hold the yarn. Go from below, grab this section of the yarn, pull it through, release from your thumb, and gently pull. Don't make it too tight. And that's how you cast on. So I'm gonna go on and cast on the remaining stitches until I'll have 52. So now I have 52 stitches, and I was very generous with the yarn, so I'm gonna cut it back just a little bit, not too much, because I will need a little bit of the yarn to be able to tuck it in. And I'm not gonna throw this away because I can use this later for markers whenever I'm gonna need a little bit lighter color. So now what we need is to go around in a loop, and for that we are going to pull the stitches a little bit back, and here I'm gonna leave on about 10 stitches, and I'm gonna carefully pull the wire out. And now you have to make sure that the stitches will not turn. This is a little tricky at the beginning, so make sure the bottom is facing the same direction, like on the needle. And I'm gonna grab here again the wire and pull the second needle through the stitches. So I'm basically pulling back until the stitches will end up on the second knitting needle. So this is what you're left with, and again, make sure that the stitches are not turned, because that's not good otherwise. So I'm gonna carefully pull these stitches to the beginning of the needle, also here. And it's really important to be very gentle because you don't want to stretch these sections out too much. Now I'm going to grab our marker and I'm gonna place it on the right needle, which will mark the end and the beginning of each row. So now I grab this yarn ball and I will wrap the yarn a couple of times very loosely around my index finger. That's what I do with Continental knitting. And I will take this loose end and pull it through so that it's not in the way. And we will start knitting. So I will start with 2 knit, and that's how it looks like when you do Continental knitting. So you put the right needle from behind through the first stitch, like so. And then you wrap it around the yarn, like so, and pull it through. I repeat, go from the back through the stitch, wrap the yarn like so around the needle and pull it through, and that's knit. When you do purl, you take the yarn and place it in front of the needle, and then you go from behind through the stitch, and then you wrap the yarn like so over the needle, and then you pull it through the stitch. Again, place the yarn over the needle, go through from the bottom, wrap the yarn around the right needle and pull it through the stitch. So that's purl. And now we do again 2 knit from the back, wrap the yarn around it, pull it through, and now 2 purl. Maybe a little bit too fast, so I'm gonna make it a little bit slower. And I will continue doing so for the entire row. When I come to a place where I have only like 2 of the stitches left on the needle, what I like doing is to pull the needle through, all the way through. I'm sorry, this is a little bit loud. And then I pull back and place all the remaining stitches carefully on the needle. And then I go to the opposite side and push the stitches a little bit to the back so that there are only a few left. And then I pull the cord or the wire through. I push the stitches carefully to the front again, and then I have again this situation. It's just so much easier. And the reason why I don't like knitting all the way to the end is because I find that it stretches this section a little bit too much and it doesn't look so neat. Alright, so now that I repositioned my needles, I will continue knitting. So my last 2 stitches were knit, so now I have to make 2 purl. 1, 2, oops, sometimes it just slides off the needle, that's normal. Then 2 knit and 2 purl. And again, I'll continue doing so until there are only about 2 stitches left on this, and then I will reposition my needles. Now we came to the marker, which means we finished the first row, so I will reposition the marker on the right side. And what I will also do is I will grab my piece of paper. I'm gonna make a little checking sign for the cast on and the first line for the first row. And now I will repeat what I already did. So I'm gonna knit around in K2 purl 2 rib. So I started with 2 knit, and that's also something you have to consider when you decide on how many stitches you will cast on. Make sure that when you divide the number of the stitches you cast on, you will have an even number, because when you start with 2 knit, you want to end with 2 purl, and that works only when the half of the stitches is an even number. So now I finished the second row, and then I will reposition the marker again. I will grab my piece of paper, mark the second row that I have finished. Make sure you always do that, because that way everything's gonna be neat. A few more things to mention is you don't want to pull too tight on your project, especially when it's like warmers, because they are supposed to be comfy. And also you don't want to make it too loose. That's kind of something you will have to work out for yourself, what works the best. But as they say, practice makes perfect, and by no means, I'm definitely not perfect, so my knitting projects don't look perfect, but I'm doing the best I can, and so can you. So I'm gonna continue this for 30 rows in total, and then we'll take it from there. Just in case there are some total beginners here, so this is the knit pattern. It looks like little V's, and this section in between, that's purl. So it's actually quite easy to recognize which is which. And once you will progress on your piece, it's gonna become more and more visible. So right now here, when I'm on my 3rd row, you can already recognize the pattern. So I have here 2 V's, then I have the purl in between, and these are again the V's, so that's knit. During knitting, sometimes the loop gets like tangled and turned, and I personally find it super annoying. In that case, when I pull the needle completely through, I allow it to turn in its kind of natural position before I start pulling it back, because that way it kind of gets detangled and it doesn't turn in such an annoying way. I'm gonna do the same here on the 2nd side, so I'm gonna pull it all the way through and again like lift it and allow it to turn a little bit before I pull back and put the stitches back on the needle. And that way I keep it kind of under control. And yes, I mean, it still gets a little bit annoying, especially at the beginning when you have the end, it kind of gets in the way. But as you progress, the more rows you made, the easier it gets, because then this doesn't get in the way. And also, if you just started out, it gets easier the more you have made. Alrighty, so I just finished the bottom of my leg warmer. So the knit-to-purl-to rib is done. I made 30 rows, and when I align it with the leg warmer that I already finished, you can see it's exactly the same length. Now, if you are a beginner and if you kind of lost count in the middle and maybe forgot to mark 1 or 2 rows, there is an easy way how you can count how many rows you already done. So I'm gonna zoom in. So you will look at one of the knit sections, and you can easily count the V's. So I have here the first V. So I always like counting the side. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. And you will count till the row below the loops that are on your needles, and that will give you the count of the rows that you made. Now we are going to move on to the knit part, which is going to be in this rose gold. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab the yarn and cut it back. It's probably 2.5 inches long. And I'm going to take this yarn ball, or more like the rest of the yarn ball. I'm gonna start with this one. And I will simply make a knot here, because that way they will stay attached. See? And now I will start knitting around, but this time I'm going to do just knit stitches. So I'm gonna pull the right needle through a little bit, through a few stitches. I still have my marker here that marks the beginning of the row. And then I'm gonna pull through here. So, and now I have 3 sections again, so that I can knit in around. So I will tuck these 2 ends inside, and I will hold them with one of my fingers. Then again, I'm gonna wrap the yarn around my index finger, and I will start knitting. So again, I'm gonna go from the front and wrap the yarn around the needle and pull it through. And when I make the first stitch, the knot kind of tends to come out, so I'm just gonna pull so that it would be back inside. And then I'm gonna make the second stitch and the third one, and again I'm gonna pull a little bit on these 2 pieces so that you can see the knot. And now I'm just simply gonna continue knitting around. For all the beginners watching, again a little repetition how to make a knit stitch. So I'm going from the left side of the stitch and going through, and then I will grab the yarn like so and pull it through the stitch, and then I'm gonna move the stitch on the right side. Again, I will go left from the stitch that I want to knit, go through, pull the yarn around, pull it through, and I will continue knitting around for 100 rows in total. I just finished the first row. I have written it down on my paper, and now I'm gonna slip the marker to the right side and I will continue with the second row. And this is of course a little bit faster. You don't have to think that much because you're doing only knit. So it's very convenient, and that is why I wanted to show you how to make these leg warmers with just knit pattern, because I think it's really great for beginners. I just finished knitting the last row of the pink section. Now, one thing you want to do is that when you make something where you have two pieces and the one piece is already finished and you are working on the second one, if you have a section like this where you should have the same amount of rows, always compare the pieces with each other, because if you would knit a little bit tighter, then even though you would have the same amount of rows, the piece would be a little bit shorter, so you would have to add a few rows. Or exactly the opposite case, if you would knit the second piece and make it a little bit more loose, then you would have fewer rows, but it would have the exactly same length. So you always want to compare. So what I did was I put the new piece on the leg warmer that's beneath it that I already finished, and I compared how it looked like, and it looked to me and that I was working a little bit tighter, so I had to add about 4 more rows in order to achieve the correct length. And now everything looks great, so I'm ready to cast on the mauve color, and I will start working on the upper cuff. Here you can see it very well that the sections are now the same length, so I will cut back here the end of the pink yarn, and this is where I'm gonna tie the mauve yarn, just like I did when we finished the bottom cuff and when we started casting on the pink yarn. So let me make a little button like so, and I'll pull it tight so that the yarn can't slip off. And now I will start knitting again, 2 knit, 2 purl, and I'm again going to use my marker so that I can count each row. I have here my piece of paper. I made already a note that I'm counting the bottom cuff and that I'm supposed to have 30 rows of 2 knit and 2 purl in total. So I'm gonna reposition my needles. I'm gonna put quite a big amount of stitches on the left needle and only a few stitches on the right needle. I'm gonna pull here the cable out, and the marker goes on the right needle. And just like we did before, I'm going to wrap the yarn a little bit around my index finger on my left hand, and I'm gonna go from the left side of the stitch and go through. I'm gonna wrap the yarn around the right needle, pull it through the stitch and move it to the right side. So I'm gonna do the same. Now we have 2 knit, and then again going with the thread to the front of the left needle, putting the right needle from the right side through the stitch on the left needle, wrapping the yarn around like so, pulling it through and moving it to the right needle. Let me repeat that again. I'm going to do 2 knit, which means I'm going with the right needle to the left side of the stitch, going through like so, wrapping the yarn around the right needle, pulling it through and moving the stitch to the right. Again, go from the left side, wrap the yarn around the right needle and pull it to the other side. Now purl, put the yarn to the front of the left needle, go from the right through the stitch, wrap the yarn around like so and pull it through and move the stitch to the other side. Again, yarn goes to the front, right needle goes through the stitch from the right side, I will wrap the thread around and so on. So I'm gonna continue doing so until I finish 30 rows. Here we have the 2 last stitches of the first row, which are purl stitches. I'm gonna move the marker to my right needle again, and I'm gonna write down that I did the first row, and now I will continue knitting around. And here I'm gonna pull on the ends of the yarn when I did the first knit stitch, because that kind of gets in the way, but you can always pull on it so that it would stay in the back. And the further you're gonna be with your work, the easier it's gonna be, because that's not gonna get in the way anymore then. So to purl, I have to move a few stitches off the right needle. That gets otherwise a little bit tight. So purl, and again knit, knit, purl, purl. So I'm done with the second last row for the cuff. I measured it and made sure that it's as long as the cuff on the other leg warmer, and also that is as long as the bottom cuff. So now we are going to cast off. Normally you could already remove the marker at this point, because this is going to be the last row, but I'm gonna keep it on because that way the beginning is gonna be a little bit more understandable for those of you who are beginners and who don't know how to cast off yet. So I am going to knit the first 2 stitches. So now I have 2 new stitches here on the right needle left from the marker. So that's basically the beginning of the very last row. And I want to close this so that I would have an end like here. So in order to do that, I'm gonna grab the left needle, I'm gonna pull it from the left through the first stitch that I just knitted, and I'm gonna pull the second stitch through the first stitch like so. Now I have the next stitch, which is purl, so I'm gonna do 1 purl stitch, and then I have again here 2 stitches. So just like I did before, I am going to put the needle from the left side through the first stitch, and now I'm gonna pull the second stitch through, and you can already see that this is creating a nice edge. So the next stitch is again purl. You want to keep the pattern going on. So again, left needle from the left through the first stitch on the right needle, pulling the second stitch through the first stitch, and now I'm left again with just 1 stitch there. Now we come to the section where there is knit, so I knit the next stitch. Again, I have here 2 stitches. I'm gonna go to the stitch that's the very right one, pull the needle from the left, and then carefully pull the second stitch through it. And you want to make sure that you're not pulling too tight. It has to be nicely stretchy, just like this section, because otherwise it would be hard to put the leg warmers on higher up. I have the last stitch, so I'm gonna cut off the yarn, and I am going to pull the yarn through the last stitch like so and make a little knot, and then I'm going to grab a knitting needle and tuck this end somewhere in. And this is how the edge now looks like. So you can see it's still stretchy, and this is how much of the mauve yarn was left, so it was actually pretty accurate. And now both of my leg warmers are finished. A few more additional tips, even though these are not necessarily tips that would have to do anything with the technical side of knitting. However, these are really important things to keep in mind. So first of all, knitting can be really straining on your neck area, on your shoulders, on your wrists and your lower arms. So it's always a great thing to warm these body parts up before you start knitting, just like you warm up before you do sports. Next, I highly recommend dividing your work into several sessions instead of knitting everything in 1 or 2 sittings, because it's just very straining and you might feel super stiff afterwards. So I personally usually knit for maximum 2 to 3 hours. And when I do that, I always throw in several breaks. So I would knit for, let's say, 30 minutes, maximum 40 minutes, and then I would put my work to side. I would stand up, limber up again, get a glass of water, walk a little bit back and forth, and then I would go back to work. And last but not least, as already mentioned, getting glass of water, always stay hydrated. I personally always get caught in work so much that I forget the entire world around me, and it's just so important to keep drinking. It's great for your skin, it's great for your overall health. You need to drink your water. So I always make sure that I have a big glass of water somewhere near so that I cannot forget. And that is it. So if you have any further questions, feel free to write them down below in the comments. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's tutorial. Thank you all so much for watching. I love you guys so much, and I'm looking forward to seeing you with my next project. Bye!